but Phil, maybe you want to start us off.
Yeah, so...
Well, actually, Phil, sorry to cut you off.
Never mind, Phil.
Back to Isaac.
Phil, I think... Yeah, no, I
Phoebe,
think
you're saying two
things
that are just like completely at odds, though. You're saying stuff was shoved down your throat, but also completely over your head. I'm not sure how those are squaring.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Hello, second pagers, and welcome back to Beyond the First Page podcast with siblings Phoebe, Phil, and Isaac. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Isaac.
And this is Club Meeting 23, and we are discussing My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. As always, this is a reminder to our listeners that we will be discussing major spoilers and plot points from throughout My Name is Red. And so if you don't want to get that book ruined for you, please read the book first and then come on and listen to the podcast, and you can get all of our thoughts on the book that we are reading, which again is My Name is Red. Also, as a reminder, please, if you like this podcast, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are listening to your podcast, give us a follow. And if you like this podcast, give us a 5-star rating. And with that, we will jump into our thought for the week. And this is a thought actually that Phil had brought up to me, and I had thought the same thing, because if you've read this book, which we recommend that you do, one of the first thoughts that I had was I need to look up a summary of what this book is about, because I was about 10 chapters in at this point, and I still maybe couldn't quite figure out what was going on, or it was quite hard to follow at first. And so I wanted to see if you guys did ever, what's your stance, I guess, is the way I will phrase this, is what is your stance on reading the summary before reading the book? And do you like to just go in cold turkey off of a recommendation of a friend, or are you finding your recommendations on somewhere like Goodreads and you want to read a little bit about it before you get into it? And then at what point do you start maybe spark noting or Googling things if you're confused? And what point do you stop reading altogether? So Isaac, I'll turn it over to you first.
So I like, if you're reading hard copy, reading the back of the book summary, or just, I think an Audible or Libby, they do a pretty good job of explaining what it is without really giving anything away. I don't think I've ever decided to read a book because I looked it up online or something. So I go off of like Rex, which is, why hopefully we're bringing you some value in this podcast by providing a lot of different recs on different books. Right. Because those are really where I feel like most people, and I definitely am biased to this, where I'm getting my recommendations for books to read. Yeah. As far as if I'm confused or something, if I'm reading purely for pleasure and I find myself having to look up what am I reading, I'm not going to keep reading it. I'm never going to do that. I had to do that for some of our podcast books, but I'm committed to the cause, so I was going to finish it. But like this book is a good example. Yeah, this book was a good example. Like I looked up all like kind of what Fendi was, and what like the group of people. It was like I don't know how you say
miniaturists.
Not miniaturists, because I assumed that was like an artist, but Azemris, they're like a portion. They're like people from a certain place that are like kind of a different sect of Islam.
Okay.
They were like the people who were saying, hey, this book is bad, or their belief was bad. That was where like the preacher was like leading that riot. That group of people I had to like look up. And that I think is fine. And it's kind of like, and we'll talk about this, but I don't mind that. And I actually sometimes, and this book was one of them, I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
But totally. If I'm having to look up like Beloved, like what is happening on page 495 in this book, I am not going to be reading it if I'm not reading it
for a book club.
Yeah.
I fully agree. Right. I think that I read the Libby, like their like description, which usually is good, usually is really good. I mean, the Nora Roberts Mind Game, that book sucked, so the whole description was the book.
Right.
But usually it's not like that. I think sometimes I go in cold turkey, but with fantasy, and especially as a super modern trend to have like 5 different narrators, and if I'm
Yeah.
audiobooking, it's helpful to get at the beginning a semblance of, okay, who are these people?
Yeah.
This one I did actually. I very rarely do this. I did restart this one at chapter 9 and then looked up. I didn't look up anything about the plot. I just looked up
Mm-hmm.
what was happening with the narration because I was very thrown off by it starting with the dead man and then the next chapter. Like I thought that that was like sort of just unique to the intro, but then it kept
Right.
switching, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. This
Yeah.
person is a dog.
Yeah. Well, and for maybe for our listeners who are just listening for the enjoyment of our voices and not necessarily for the reading, basically each chapter is told by a different narrator, and it starts, my name is Red, or I am a dog, I am a tree. And they're all of these either animate or inanimate objects are part of the story, telling different perspectives of how they see it. But of course, if you're just orienting yourself to the story, that's very confusing. So I took the opposite approach of you guys, though. Well, especially you, Phil, from what you're saying, where I thought that because of this, I really needed to, on my own, try to figure out what was going on, because I didn't want, sometimes if you're looking at the summary or what people are saying online, that really jumbles what your perspective of the book is. And I think one of this book in particular, or something like Brothers K or even Beloved, it is really what you as the reader are getting out of it sometimes. And so I tried to power through, but I almost caved because I was very confused about what was going on. And then I did get there. And I think, if you're still thinking about reading this book, definitely you can get there too, but much more complicated. And it made me think, how are the boys approaching this, and how are our listeners approaching this book? And so I wanted to just get your guys' take on it. And I think that does lend into a topic we want to discuss a little later on in the podcast, which is really just, if you have to look up a book and what it's going on, is it a good book? But we're going to put that on pause for a second, because I think to start talking about, well, first we should do this book in 60 seconds. And then we'll get into our first topic. So Isaac, before we start, could you just give us My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk in 60 seconds?
Yep. So My Name is Red in 60 seconds. And Black is arguably the main character, comes back to Istanbul after 12 years of working abroad. He left due to the embarrassment of confessing his love for a younger cousin, Shekra. When he comes back to Istanbul, Shekra is potentially a widow, and his uncle, who forced him away, is seeking his help in finishing a forbidden book for the Sultan. The book is still illustrated in the Venetian style, and therefore considered sacrilegious to the faith of Islam. Because of this, Black's uncle, Anishta, has been working in secret with the top miniaturists or artists of the day. Another master miniaturist who has found out about the book is found murdered, and soon after, Anishta himself is found murdered, and the last picture of the forbidden book is stolen. Black marries Shekra in a haste to protect her from her brother-in-law, and then is commanded by the Sultan to find the murderer and thief. Black and Master Osman, the head illuminator, in charge of all the miniaturists, are given 3 days to recover the last illustration, or they will be tortured, and the miniaturist workshop will be desecrated.
Yeah, perfect. And so back to what I was saying, this is kind of orient our readers and listeners again with what's going on in the book. And so you're getting the perspective of Shekra, you're getting the perspective of Black, his uncle, the murderer, some inanimate objects that the miniaturists have drawn or been involved with. You're getting the perspective from all the other miniaturists that are involved in creating this book. You're getting the perspective of Master Osman. And so I think we would be remiss to not talk about the characters and the characters themselves, what was going on with them, who we thought the murderer was. And for me, there were some characters that were very annoying and some characters you really liked. And so I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that as well. First, were you right about who you thought the murderer was? Who did you think it was? And then maybe some characters that you liked or didn't like. I know that's a lot, but Phil, maybe you want to start us
Yeah.
off.
So.
Well, actually, Phil,
right.
sorry to cut you
No,
off.
you're good.
Never mind, Phil.
Back to Isaac.
Phil, I think before we start any of this, like, we want to bring the energy on this podcast a little bit. And I think it's hard when you're doing a book club that we've already prescribed all of these books, because I think we for next year are going to do it a little differently to not be so bogged down if our book list starts going one way or the other. But, for our listeners, I wanted you to just say, Phil, what you thought about this book up front, because I think that's really going to bring the energy for today's discussion.
Yeah. So I texted Isaac and Phoebe, and if any of you follow me on my Goodreads, which no one does. So, but
I do. I
there's
like your
5.
posts.
I don't know how. No engagement, dude. I literally write a review on every book I read. And then Isaac, who doesn't ever update Goodreads, has like 130 friends.
I do?
Your Goodreads
Isaac.
Wow.
So
I don't even know my Goodreads password.
That's
I
what
can
I'm
only
saying,
log
dude. I
in from
literally-
Safari on my computer, or I can't get in because it's saved on the keychain.
That's so funny.
Thank you for the support, second pagers.
Anyway, I think that this might be my favorite book of all time, if not like the most artful book that I've ever read. And this is not something that I throw around lightly. I don't really say that. My current favorite book is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I read over 12 years ago. But I usually don't say something is my favorite book. I think we've read a lot of good books on this podcast. I think we've read 3 Nobel winners already. And I just thought that this book, Orhan Pamuk is also a Nobel winner, but was just really exceptional. So, yeah, I loved it. I thought it was just really, really great. And we'll get into the sort of why I thought that. I can talk about the characters now as well, which you also asked about. I really liked the characters. Not like I liked every character, obviously. Like Hassan was a rapist, incestual uncle. But I liked that all the characters were multifaceted. And I actually loved sort of the most exceptional thing or most unique thing he did with the novel was sort of have these non-person people personified and as characters. And the way he sets this up is that it's told by this storyteller who you find out at the end is taking drawings from the miniaturists and sort of play acting out what they might say. And we also find out that those drawings are for the book, which is pretty cool. But I liked these both. I thought they added a lot of comedy. One of the characters I liked was the tree. I thought he was really funny. And basically, he's talking about the Hoja, who's this religious zealot that actually existed in real life. So it's not, or like in the book. And I think he's like telling a story about a fictional one, but it's pretty obviously supposed to be him. And the dog had previously talked about how much he didn't like the Hoja and thought he was ridiculous too. And so he's talking about this story of him being a tree. And he says, my lush leaves together with the aforementioned Hoja, and excuse the expression, they were going at it like dogs in heat. And he's just sort of talking about this Hoja and this other character in the tree. And while the giant, whom I later recognized was the devil, attended to his business with our hero, he was compassionately kissing his lovely ear and whispering into it, coffee is a sin, coffee is a vice. And it's like funny that that's what the devil is whispering into someone's ear, like coffee is a sin, because obviously coffee is supposed to be amazing. So I thought that was funny, but I thought it was also really masterful, the My Name is Red chapter, where he comes at it from a color. This sort of jumps the gun a lot to what we get from this book, but I think the My Name is Red character, importantly, sort of settles this philosophical debate about blindness in art and what is meant to be art, because the red is a color describing to you, and it uses all these different other things that you can see. And it makes it very obvious that you had no idea what red is without sight. in this
Seeing.
whole like, oh, the best artists are blind because they can see it. They have done it so many times, and
Reached
yeah,
that.
like it's just BS. And I thought that that was like a
Right.
really cool way of doing it without like changing the novel completely, because we already just got these random takes from dogs and trees and coins, and like it wasn't like, I don't know, I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I think like you got a lot of things that I didn't get out of this, which is why I was excited to talk to you about it. And I'm excited to hear, Isaac, too, your response to that and also your take on the characters. And I guess, Phil, maybe to thinking about who, if you were right about the murder, or maybe, I think from your perspective, the murder was kind of secondary to all these other things you were getting out of it.
Yeah, I think I've said this a couple times in the podcast. I just read, especially in murder mysteries. Like I don't super try to predict, but I saw this question coming. And so I thought that maybe it was Orphan himself. That didn't really make any sense. And then I thought at the end, actually, that we were never going to know. It was going to be four of them in the room, and it was just going to keep
Right.
switching perspectives. And I don't know whether or not, I think that would have annoyed a lot of people. I think that would have been a cool way to do it, but I also like that he didn't get too fancy with it. Like I think that might have been too fancy.
Yeah. What about you, Isaac?
I thought that Butterfly, Olive, and Stork were all the same person, and it was like a like Fight Club thing. But I think I thought like too much about it. I kind of started thinking this once we got to hear the opinions of Master Osman when he was in the
Crypt.
In the room.
in the
library.
treasury, kind of talking
Yeah.
about their different styles. And I was like, this is kind of an old guy. He already blinded himself purposefully for this whole thing.
Right.
Wild scene, dude. Wild scene.
Yeah.
So maybe he's just like a little crazy, and Black doesn't really like know this. So Osman is talking about them as three different people, but they're really all the same person with different, in each like personality has a different style.
Right.
And then I thought I was really onto it because on page 605, I believe there is either my book or everything has a typo, and it refers to Olive instead of Stork. And it says, Olive, the backside of whose armor was white with flour, was courageously forging into the heart of the dervish lodge, lamp in hand.
When it's
But it
supposed
was
to be
Stork who was riding in his armor on the flower. So I was like, oh shit, there's a like
They're the same person.
they're all
really
the
cool.
same thing.
Whoa, that's a level
But
more.
I think it was just a typo. And I don't think I would have
Yeah.
caught it if I hadn't been reading the book.
Right.
Like if I'd been
Hard
listening.
copy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I thought. Again, I think that it may have been, that would have maybe been too clever. Like at the end, this was like for me, and we'll talk about, I think we get into it more too. Like this was a murder mystery, and all like the extra,
Characters.
philosophical, religious stuff is just like a cool way to tell a murder mystery, and was sort of secondary. I didn't get as much out of it, I don't think, as Phil did. I would also say this is definitely the best book we've read on the podcast, and in my top 5 or 7 books that I've ever read. I think really, really liked it,
Interesting.
and would definitely read it again. Like this,
That's
I feel
the
like
thing.
this is one of
the books
that
where
you can.
Right.
I would read this every single year.
I would try
thought
to
that
find the murderer in his chapters. Like I would try to find shit that give him away. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that Phil talked about the chapters that were the different pictures. I thought that was so cool. I was like elated when I figured out that all those chapters of I'm a dog, I'm a coin, I'm a tree were pictures that were in the book, and then they got revealed more as the storyteller. I didn't necessarily like know what they were providing. Mine is just adding this like introduction to a different culture. Then when you find out then that this is some guy at a bar essentially telling stories to only men, it's like a bunch of guys hanging out, so they're like crude. They're
Yeah.
I just thought that was great. We talked in the beginning, do you look up something, or do you try to figure it out? But I think this was one of those that you just sort of have to accept that it's happening and like meld into the story. And then,
Yeah,
near
totally.
the end of the book, things just start like falling into place. And you can have even a better appreciation for it, but still lends to you wanting to read this book again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear you guys talk about this. And we talked yesterday about what we wanted to say. And Phil really put this into perspective for me personally when he compared this to East of Eden, which I was probably one of the first like classic books I've ever read in high school. And where you two are saying, you could get something new every year out of this and would reread it again. East of Eden was like that to me. And your comparison was so apt, Phil, because that's a book that I'm like, wow, yeah, I got so much out of this. There was a story, but there was also so many messages. This was not the case for me. And maybe partially, to me, it was a cast of characters book. It wasn't a plot book. And so maybe that's where it didn't get me. I thought the murderer was Shekara, and she also was the character that just really rubbed me the wrong way. And her and Master Osmond both, I just like get these two out of this story. But they were two of the biggest, and that was intentional, I think, for sure. That she was very unlikable. Master Osmond was kind of standing for everything that this book was aiming to push against. I found, and so that was very intentional, but it really did speak to me. And so, yeah, I was obviously wrong because, as we've already said, the murder was Olive. But yeah, I think that to me, I can just also talk about our second point we wanted to bring up of, is it a masterpiece if the average reader can't understand without spark noting or Googling what you're trying to get out of it? And this has been the question for several of the books on the podcast. I think, we brought up Beloved, Brothers K. I just felt that this was too much for me and it was kind of being shoved down my throat a little bit. And maybe I need to slow down. Maybe it would be beneficial to reread it. I get so much more out of something like A Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver or Freshwater for Flowers, something a little bit more relevant to me. Phil, you were talking about this grand movement in art, and I don't care. Like, that's not a connection for me. I find reading about human connection and relationships much more interesting, and I can discern a lot more from things like that. And so this was just a bit over my head, and again, that's partially on me.
Wait,
I
Phoebe,
think
you're
just
saying two
listening to
things that are just like completely at odds, though. You're saying stuff was shoved
okay,
down your throat, but also completely over your head, which just I'm not sure how those are squaring.
like for me, it felt like there was so many side stories with all these characters that obviously I'm supposed to be getting something out of it. So that was like
But
the
you
shoving
weren't
down of the
getting
throat. But
anything. Okay.
I wasn't. I just didn't feel, I mean, I was, but it wasn't, I was getting things, but it wasn't what I was looking for to get out of a book, maybe is a better way to say it.
I obviously did like it. I thought that one of the no, and I think that, but I think your points are valid. I think that if you don't, I guess why I thought that was cool is because I also don't care about that, but I do
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
Like I think that that is
Hmm.
something that like is a movement that is just like so underappreciated. I mean, you hear about perspective and stuff and how that was, but this was like, I mean, it was a religion. These people were murdering each other because
Over
they
this.
thought that it was like a sin, and I thought that that was really
Right.
interesting. And I think it also ties into something that's completely foreign to Judeo-Christian like people, that depicting Muhammad is illegal, and it's
Hmm.
like not it's not frowned upon. Like, I think it's a murderable offense, or it's a punishment by death. So that is just a very interesting value of this culture that we don't get. And I think that that ties into seeing the world in Allah's eyes in a way that, to be honest, I haven't really fleshed out myself. Like, I think I would reread the
Hmm.
book and sort of ponder upon that, and how this, like, seeing the world from Allah is also tied to the fact that the main person in their religion can never be seen. So I think that there's something there. I think that the entire culture of just art movement, it wasn't a viewpoint into just Muslim culture. It was also a viewpoint into antiquated Muslim culture. And I think that like the 500 years ago, men being crass in the coffee house and just talking about, I'm Master Butterfly and I'm so good at art that I landed this hottie down the street was like wild. Like he was so proud of that. And um yeah, so I think finally to say the last point, is just I think that looking up something does definitely diminish from its greatness. And I think that I'd never read a book before this besides the Gabriel Garcia Marquez one that I talked about that took on these philosophical meanings and didn't either. So there's two sort of ways you can do it. You can either do it like Toni Morrison, where Isaac is looking up what is happening on this page and you have no idea what's
Right.
happening. Or you can do it like Dostoevsky, where you can just get beat over the head because it's 100 pages of a conversation. And so you're like, they're literally like, he's just typing this into a manifesto. Like, this is what it is. And I think this was the
Right.
only book that I've ever read that you got those, but it wasn't annoying, or it was part of the plot. Like what I thought was masterful, not only the other characters, but I also thought it was cool that how Black was to find the murderer was to feel was to sort of gather how they feel about this movement. And he was
Mm-hmm.
told to ask these questions about art. And so it was part of the investigation to get these philosophical sort of attitudes of the miniaturists, which allowed Orhan Pamuk to put philosophy into this book because it would tell Black who the murderer was. And I just thought that was
Yeah.
really cool.
Well, I wanted you to summarize maybe, and if you
Yeah.
can, just I hear you, but I think I need more from you of like, why was this so yeah, I guess I just didn't feel the same way, and I'm trying to feel that way that you're feeling
Yeah.
because I think we do agree a lot of times on things. And you said you don't want it shoved down your throat like Dostoevsky, but I think I needed it a little bit, not shoved down your throat, but over explained, I should
Yeah.
say.
So I mean, I
You
think
know,
I would counter with some passages here where we have basically he's going around, Black is going around to the miniaturist to ask him this question, and he
mhm,
asks, allow me to ask you a question, he said. According to Master Osmond, time separates a true miniaturist from others, the time of illustration. What were my thoughts? Listen closely. And this is Stork talking. And now he tells these parables, and it's 3 stories on painting and time. Aleph,
mhm,
Ba, and then Jim. And at the end, though, he I think he does a really good job of, like, Stork is basically sort of talking down to him. And
mhm,
so he asks him, what are the morals of the 3 stories you've told? And he
mhm,
literally says, the first story with the minaret demonstrates that no matter how talented a miniaturist might be, it is time that makes a picture perfect. Ba, the second story with the harem in the library, reveals that the only way to escape time is through skill and illustrating. As for the third
mhm.
story, you proceed to tell me. And he says the only way to make time and skill is through death. And so that's like the death of blindness and eyes.
Right.
I don't know how it gets any clearer than that, Phoebe. Like he literally said, these are the points of my stories. So I guess,
But who cares? Like, what does that teach me as Phoebe Cornell?
okay. So basically what you're saying is, I think a main point of this book was, can art be depicted by a person, or does it, like, can you have a personal touch? Can you have a signature? And
Vanity was a huge
right. So that's what it
I
teaches you.
found.
He basically says that it's this entire hypocritical sense of the word vanity where all of these people are so vain for thinking they're the best at not having a signature. And that doesn't make any sense. Like, I think the idea here is that if you're a proud person, you will show your vanity in some way, and you will, like, that will be demonstrated whether or not you want to be. It's not, I guess it's not originality that makes vanity. That's not the same thing. And I think that's a point he gets across pretty well. I mean, that's why you should care, I guess. These three stories are just like sort of helping you get to that point. But I think there's more lessons than that in there. I think just even if you just take the art, I think that would be like a secondary lesson to, can art be just a replication or can it be original? I think that's like the first line. And then you can sort of apply that into your entire life. That was my takeaway. What I love about this book is that it's not a big book. It doesn't have a spark notes. So there's not a bunch of people on the internet telling me I'm wrong. So
Right. You're the guy right now.
Do
What
you
do you
think
think,
there
Isaac?
was a similar to Brothers K, how there was like kind of a push against the belief of Christianity today, of a push against the Islamic faith, of them using that as their sort of like to be able to hide in?
Hugely.
Which I thought that was really cool, just because it's like a perspective that, especially in America, we don't have at all. Like, it annoys the hell out of me when that like Christianity is considered the, you know, the political correct religion or whatever, and you have all these politicians talking about like, oh, the God and all this shit. But like, to hear the Islamic, like this whole thing
Just
was based
saying.
on Islam, and you were like, and it is cool to be like, these other cultures are having the exact same like
Conversations
battle
and thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
that's
I thought that was
100% true, Isaac. I
Yeah.
think that
that's what I got more than the I got the art thing of more just like, hey, art was like really important, and that you can't hide. It doesn't matter what religion it is. You can't hide. You can't just blindly follow this and hide in it as an excuse to do things.
Yeah.
Like, you need to. It's okay to believe in something, but you have to, like, you can't use that as an excuse. That's kind of what I saw. Like, and then the vanity and stuff I hadn't really flushed out as much, but more of just like this pushing against the current religious beliefs of the day can't be a reason that you think a certain way. You have to like believe in something yourself.
Yeah. And you're saying, Isaac, like the current in as it pertained to art in this conversation of like, just because everyone is saying this is the way that the art should be doesn't mean that that's true. Like, you need to have your own thoughts and opinions. Or are you saying am I misunderstanding you?
Yeah, I mean, art was just the vehicle of expressing that kind of like other hidden meaning. I thought this book was also just really cool because even if you didn't get anything from it, which really till I finished it and started thinking about it, like if I hadn't been reading this for a book club, I don't know if I would have. And I think I still would have walked away being like, wow, that was a great freaking book. Because at the end of the day, it's a great story with like excellent writing, awesome characters, and a cool ending. Like, it's a murder mystery. It's, you know, it's like there's all these freaking people are churning out books like with the same idea of a plot. But he just did that in a super cool. You were introduced to a very unique time frame. Like, I finished this book and was like, I want to know more about the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
I want to know like Genghis Khan, the Persians, the Ottoman Empire, all are colliding in the Middle East at certain times of this story. Then you have the whole idea of culture of this art, and they're changing, and people believe in this so much that they're blinding themselves, so they can't be forced to paint like the Venetians, which is now Europe. So you have they call them the Europeans are coming in. Like, it's wild. There's so much culture clash here. And, we're reading murder mysteries that are like freaking what's her face, Nora Roberts is like cranking out 4 years or whatever.
I think that like there was like a coup d'etat. There was like there was like a cherry on top and then a coup d'etat where at the end he makes himself the son as the storyteller. So that's the cherry.
Right.
And then the coup d'etat was the last 10 minutes of the book. You realize that this is all some shit that happened in the Ottoman Empire in the 1600s.
The
and it's like
chronological
based off a
timeline.
real story. And that was
Right.
crazy to me. Like, would never have seen
Yeah,
that
that was
coming.
cool.
So I thought that even like accelerated through the finish there at the end, in my opinion. But
yeah, no, I liked that too, and I liked that he did the chronological events at the end as well, because like you said, Isaac, all these different cultures were clashing. I guess then we just spent a lot of time talking about poking yourself in the eye with a needle to blind yourself. Like to me, it felt like there could have been all of that been talked about then. I think that I was looking for a little bit more of that clash of culture, Isaac. I felt that the one point of the blinding was really drilled home for me, for sure. I think I definitely took away vanity and originality. I don't know that
So Phoebe, here's one thing
formulated
that
originality until you said
I
that,
think
though, but
maybe that it was well enough embedded that maybe you did get a lot out of the culture and just like didn't know.
Yeah, you're right. I guess I was hoping, and not that your guys' commentary wasn't great. I think you both came with a lot of examples. It's so interesting to me. You guys love this book. It's one of those things. And I think all of our listeners can understand, some books really speak to you and others just really do not. And I think for me, this didn't speak to me as much as it did to you guys. But I think I'm going to change my rating to a 3 because I want to reread this. I had a 2.6. I'm trying out this new
Point
decimal
scale.
system,
Yeah.
the point scale. Yeah. But I had a 2.6 because I thought I agree with you guys. Just a unique plot, which was really great. That alone gets it to a 2 for me. And then the writing obviously was fabulous. The cultural aspects were great. But I think I do want to reread it because I trust both of your opinions, and I just feel like I missed something here. And I need to maybe slow down and take it in. I did take a lot of notes, and a lot of things stuck with me. Like I had a couple quotes, like to be human is to err. I thought that was a great quote. Definitely things that were said that made me think, but I think I need to reread this. So I'm going to give it a 3, and I'm going to take away some homework on this one. And
Nice.
I think I know maybe both of your ratings, but please feel free to shoot.
Yeah, mine's a hard 3. Definitely, as far as storytelling, the only book that even comes close is Foster. But yeah,
From our book list.
Yeah, the only other 3-star.
Yeah.
I think Casual Vacancy was just so entertaining and such a good character analysis. But I think that this 3-star is better than the other 2, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Best book we've read. It's funny, we talked about it last podcast, but this jumps to the top for sure.
Oh, yeah,
and then,
I know.
Phoebe, you said you liked, I was going to suggest you maybe are putting too much pressure on yourself to get something out of this because it has won a Nobel Prize or because you had a feeling you're supposed to. And I would say this to... but you said you liked the story, so I don't know. But to readers, this is a great story, even if you get no extra meaning out of it. Just enjoy the book, and I think you'll finish it and be like, "Wow, even if it's a 2.5, that's an awesome." You could have read a lot worse books than that. So just enjoy it, and then as you think about it, you may get more stuff. I think I will reread this one again purely for the story and hope that something else comes up that I learn new, know? And I think this is one of those books that could happen.
Especially being oriented more to the story. I mean, just orienting yourself takes a few chapters like we talked about. Yeah. So getting stuff from those initial chapters, I think, would be fabulous.
Yeah. I think something we didn't even discuss at all, which I think I could get later, is just the Jewish presence in Istanbul.
Yes.
Super cool.
Yes.
Didn't even think about that too much because Esther was such a character in herself. But yeah, I mean, just a lot to get from this book.
Right.
The fact that it snows in Istanbul.
Wild! It was so cold. I was just like, what?
Wait, I didn't think that was weird at all.
Oh my gosh. I was mind blown every time. Every time
it's
they're
snowing
talking about
in
how cold it was.
Yeah.
For me, it was
to me, that's snowing in Greece or in the Mediterranean on the beach.
Any sense. I was blown too, Isaac. I really was, yeah.
Wow, never thought about that. Well, I will say, I think that this book was what The Shadow of the Wind by which we read for this book club by Carlos Ruiz Zafón and The Brothers K was trying to be, or those two books were trying to be this book. I think if you're looking for books like this book, both of those to me stuck out. And so those would be my recommendation if you're looking for a book like it.
My recommendation, actually, I wanted to take this a little bit different way. I love sort of fantasy books that you walk away and you're like, I feel like there was something else there, like pretty deep. And a lot of them get religious. That's fine. I don't think that this got like it got religious in a sense, but in a different way. If you're into that and you want to sort of think about philosophy and religion, but also just like probably the best plot I've ever read is The Black Prism. That is, I told Phoebe, like, that's my number one fantasy rec to people. And it gets great entire series, 5-book series, gets very philosophical at the end. But my second one is anything by Orson Scott Card, actually. He's the one who wrote The Ender's Game. He also wrote Pathfinder. And just his books are so just ridiculously philosophical, but like you could ignore it and get a sweet plot out of any of the books. Those are my 2 recs.
Yeah, I took this book that I'm recommending, it's The Enemy of All Mankind by Stephen Johnson. It's a nonfiction book about a pirate in the 1700s. And I did this recommendation more so for just the introduction of the culture. It's another really cool culture that I don't think there's like Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff, but that it really delves into like actually learning about it in a little bit more nonfiction way than this book does. So the plot line really isn't there, but any story about pirates is a good story.
Facts.
So it's still cool. And you learn a lot of cool stuff about a culture that we don't really get introduced to that much.
Cool. Yeah, that was a good recommendation, good approach. Before we go, I want to talk about what we're reading next time. And I also want to remind people we've taken out one of the segments, which is what we're currently reading. If you are interested in what we're currently reading, please check us out on TikTok. And we will be posting our ratings of books that we've just read that we really like or maybe didn't like and for you to avoid. But yeah, again, if you're interested in what we're currently reading, please check that out on our TikTok Beyond the First Page podcast. And we are reading next time a fantasy book, which is always exciting. This is The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. And Isaac, would you just give us a quick synopsis of that before we go?
Yes. The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman is about a gifted young knight named Colum who arrives at Camelot only to find it in disarray following King Arthur's death at the Battle of Camlan. The remaining knights are a mismatched group, including Sir Palamedes, Sir Dagonet, and Nimue, Merlin's former apprentice. Together, they must reclaim Excalibur and restore Camelot in a world threatened by returning fairies, monsters, and rival factions led by Morgan Le Fay. To succeed, they must uncover the truth behind Arthur's fall and confront the ghost of Britain's troubled past. Cool.
I know, this sounds good. Have you read it yet, Phil?
I have not. Lev Grossman wrote the Bright Materials, I think, or it's basically known as sort of like the adult version of Harry Potter. And I think they made a series, an Amazon series about it. Lev Grossman is huge. So he knows what he's doing. I'm excited.
Okay, cool. Well, great. And we'll do our parting salutation as always. This is a reminder to call someone that you love, tell them that you love them, tell them about a good book. Hopefully that is My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. Share this podcast with them. And with that, stay classy, second pagers. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.
See you guys.